Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy day to join us, especially at such a busy time of year. My name is Bruce McConaughey and I'm the Head of Industry Development at Quality Meat Scotland, and I'm delighted to be hosting today's webinar on measuring grass, methods and benefits. Today's webinar has been delivered as part of a series of GrassCheck Great Britain webinars. As most of you will know, GrassCheckGB is a collaboration between Meat Promotion Wales, HCC, AHDB and Quality Meat Scotland, together with the Centre for Innovation, Excellence in Livestock and researchers at the Agri-Food and Biosciences Institute and the Rothamsted Research, as well as some industry sponsors throughout the UK. Today's webinar has proved very popular and we had almost 180 registrations. This is the second webinar developed by the GrassCheckGB team, and we're delighted to be joined today by Dr. Taro Takahashi from the Rothamsted Research and Robert Hassall from Handley Enterprises Limited, to highlight the value and importance of measuring grass and how to get it right. Measuring grass effectively leads to better informed, more effective grassland management and grazing decisions. And over the next few minutes, we should try and cover why you should measure grass, a detailed guide to plate metering on the key principles and how the plate meter works, the equations, the walk, including the pattern and number of plonks or readings in relation to accuracy, and alternative measuring methods, including quadrants and satellites, and utilising pasture. The webinar will be about 35 minutes long, and we'll have some time for questions for both the speakers at the end of both presentations. So, without further delay, I am delighted to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Taro Takahashi. Taro is a research scientist at Rothamsted Research's North White Farm platform in Devon and Director of Graduate Studies at Bristol Veterinary School. He specialises in trade-off analytics between economic and environmental performances of agricultural systems and leads a team investigating potential unintended consequences of reduction in or withdrawal of livestock from UK agriculture. So over to you, Taro.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Taro Takahashi, and as just a curtain raiser to Robert's talk about the grass measurement, I will just set the scene in terms of why a GrassCheck project is important, why measuring grass is important in a wider context. So I start from the economic reason why we should measure the grass. As we already discussed in the previous webinar months ago, the whole point of running this GrassCheck program is that we know that grass is the cheapest and perhaps the most nutritious on a per budget basis input for the pasture-based livestock systems. The preceding research has shown that if you increase the utilization of grass by 1 ton, and then therefore utilizing a better quality grass within the season, you have got a substantial increase in profitability per farm or per hectare per year for both dairy system and the meat systems. So here we are talking about the grass utilization. And one thing we should be very careful about is the distinction between the production and the utilization of the grass. So this is the result of our modeling analysis and showing how much grass can be produced and how much grass can be actually utilized by livestock on a given year on a given soil, as an example. What you see here is that the peak of the grass for production on this particular soil is about 64 days interval in terms of the harvest, whereas the to utilize the grass you have to come back to the same pasture on the interval of somewhere between 18 to 28 days. So the difference comes from the fact that just because you have got a lot of grass doesn't mean that and they get eaten, they get utilized for the production of either milk or milk. Because unless you are able to maximize the up and down of grass growth and grass consumption, then you have got a lot of grass just standing there without getting utilized. So you want to avoid that. So in other words, the pasture growth and pasture quality can be used as useful indicators to assist the management decisions. But to do that, you have to know exactly how the grass is growing. Now, as I said, grass growth is a function mainly of two things: soil and the weather patterns of that particular year on that particular paddock. So how much of this information can actually be told from the soil only? And do we really have to measure the grass is the next natural question. So what you are seeing here is the difference between the level of soil organic carbon, or the indicator of soil health, and then how much how well animal performs on each paddock. As you can see, what we found at Northwick in Devon was that the soil health, or the level of soil organic carbon, can actually very well predict how animal performs on each paddock. And therefore, you can use that as a good indicator for where and which pasture, which paddock you should utilize more. However, we at Research Farm, and we drew this conclusion from the many sampling points, 264 points to be precise. And then we aggregated these data to come up to this conclusion. We realized that this is not possible on commercial farms. And therefore, what we did was to reduce the number of the sample size gradually to see how much sample size is at minimum required to replicate our finding on commercial farms. What we found was that to use soil as a predictor for grass growth and the live weight gain of animals for the meat farms, you need at least about 3 samples per hectare. So whilst it is scientifically possible to use soil and almost soil only to predict animal performance, it is highly costly and not very practical, especially for large-scale farms with the budget constraint. So that means that you have to actually physically measure the grass performance, because otherwise you have to rely on all these expensive chemical analysis of the soils. So these are the other methods, other than the plate meter methods we are going to discuss today, that has got, loosely speaking, the similar level of the accuracy. In some conditions, they are more accurate. In some conditions, they are less accurate. But loosely speaking, they're comparable in terms of the sample size, in terms of the number of repetitions, and so on. But then, as you can see, all these 5 methods require much larger time or financial investment compared to the plate meter measurements. For example, when you try to make quadrats, that means that you have to go to the pasture, you have to actually cut the grass, you have to dry them out, and you have to weigh them. If you want to use the automated method, then that means that you need an initial outlay for the equipment. So combine them together. Probably the best way, or the easiest way, at least for the entry point to the grass measurement, is to measure the grass as such manually. Also, I'd finally like to point out that even though soil can predict the performance of the grass and animal if they are appropriately measured, the actual interval that is required for the animal rotation or cutting rotation depends on weather. and also the interactions between soil and weather. For example, if your paddock, one particular paddock is not very good with drainage, then that means that on a wet season, you may have to come back to this pasture much less frequently, and you obviously experience that firsthand on your own farm. So that means that whilst the model can predict on average across many years how many days interval would be optimal, that doesn't mean that that would be applicable under this particular condition of weather for this year. So again, there is a good case to combine weather information and soil information to the actual measurement on the paddock, especially if it doesn't take much effort and a huge gain from doing that, as Robert is going to discuss. If you want to know more information about GrassCheck projects, we are always available on website, Twitter, and other media. We are coming back to more events in a few months' time as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Taro. That was great. I think we'll move now on, and if we've got any questions, remember to keep them till the end. We'll move on to Robert. Robert is a former dairy farmer from New Zealand, moved to the UK in 1990 and has been pretty closely involved with UK dairy industry ever since. He established Handley Enterprises in 2016, predominantly to support the EU market with GenQuip plate meters. The company primarily focuses on providing a support network for farmers while also working with GenQuip New Zealand to implement improvements. So over to you, Robert.
Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. The topics I will be covering are how does a plate meter work, using a plate meter, walking the field, equations, other methods of measuring, and pasture utilization. We do need to keep in mind pasture measuring on its own is a 40-minute topic, and today I'll be covering both pasture measuring and pasture utilization in 20 to 25 minutes. And as a result, we will just be touching the surface. The following is very relevant to how managing pasture works. No year goes as you expect it to go. 1 year in 7 is what I call a textbook year, when everything falls into place and you think you've cracked it, but reality comes into play the following year. The best grassland managers monitor, record, and more importantly, react. In reality, managing pasture is not easy, but the monetary rewards from utilizing pasture is just there for the taking. So why measure? Oops. So why measure? To determine how much pasture feed you have available, to monitor growth rates, and monitor how overall cover is changing on your property. How does a plate meter work? A plate meter actually works by measuring the height of compressed grass. The height of compressed grass is converted through an equation to kilograms of dry matter per hectare, and the plate size to weight ratio is based on 6 kilograms per square meter. And there's no way that users would carry around a plate meter that actually measures 1 meter square and weighs 6 kilograms. So that is why the plates are actually, we work on this ratio. So the original plate meters, the original plate meters had 2 counters, one on the top to keep track of the number of plonks, one on the bottom to record clicks. And each click was actually 5 millimeters, but I'll come back to that in a minute. And equations are based on clicks. The first plate meters also had lead shot added to the base to get the ideal weight to surface ratio. So then what's actually happened? Electronic versions have come into place. The first ones had the counter on the side, and then the later ones actually have an all-in-one case. The plate meters actually record the number of plonks, the average height in clicks, and the average kilograms of dry matter. So it makes it much easier for the user to use. And due to the electronic counter being heavier, the lead shot has now been removed from the base of the plate meter. So we'll just quickly run through the using of a plate meter. Do not roll the plate meter. Saying that because excessive rolling affects their overall readings, a slight rolling is not an issue as it averages out. Do not choose where to place the plate. Avoid plugged areas. Avoid walking during or after heavy rain, because actually that rain weights down the grass, so you'll actually get lower readings. Keep the plate clean. Do wash sap off the shaft with soapy water, and do not use WD-40 or oil of any description, as this will affect the free movement of the shaft. It's quite interesting, we have actually had plate meters where engine oil had been used and the oil had carried debris into the mechanism, and when the plate meter had been stored over the winter, it had actually seized solidly. So, you know, it's just one of those things, soapy water, or just even washing the shaft off after use and the plate makes a huge difference. So using the plate meter, place the plate meter squarely, plan your walk, plonk every second or third stride, and mark your walk for different users. So the key here is if you mark a walk clearly, different users will follow the same route, and this in turn will give more consistent readings for comparisons, especially when calculating grass growth. But do keep plonking. Don't stop at 30. The more plonks, the more accurate the plate meter readings will be. So when walking the field, the debate goes on, read the pattern. In the real world, very few people will walk a W pattern. I mean, because the distance and the time allowance is actually too great. There is diagonal, and also some people I know work circumferences. So we're just going to actually cover all those as we go today. But I do know that AFB, I and I are doing their own work on effectiveness of different patterns. You know, is it W, is it a V, or is it diagonal? So for the case of this today, I've actually done predominantly diagonal or V walks. And so in this field here, we did a V. The cover came out at 3,160 kilograms of dry matter per hectare, and we did 213 plonks. In the next field was a diagonal, same field, 360 kilograms of dry matter per hectare and 125 plonks. And I'd have to sort of say that actually the chances of you ever getting exactly the same reading with the plonk meter when you're doing two walks are very, very slim. But in this case, it was a fluke and we did manage it. So just to actually give you an example of data we're getting out of a plate meter when we're walking the field, this spreadsheet shows you the farm name, or it's a test farm I use. This is the paddock number. There is the average kilograms of dry matter that we did in the walk. This is actually plonk. In this case, this is plonk number 252. This shows the height in millimeters, the kilograms of dry matter for that reading, the residual, the longitude and latitude, and the equation that's being used. So we have the huge amount of data coming through, and the whole idea is the more data, the more accurate we will actually get with the readings. So another one of the walks we've actually done is actually just for part of our trial work, we've actually walked circumferences. In this case, a little bit keen, but we did over 500 plonks around the edge of a field. And then when we went in and actually did a diagonal, so the circumference read actually 2,086 kilograms per hectare of dry matter per hectare. When we did the diagonal, in this case, it came out to 2,280 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. And the main reason for this in this field, the cover throughout the middle of it was actually much higher than around the perimeter. And when we actually went on and did a V walk in the same field, it came to 2320 kilograms of dry matter per hectare. So the difference between the circumference and diagonal was 194 kilos. The difference between the circumference and the V was 234 kilos. And the difference between the V and the diagonal was 40 kilos. So it just sort of shows you the differences. But my preference is actually always walking either a V or a diagonal, because you tend to cover the field, but it's actually knowing your field. And if we actually look at this one here, which is another farm that we walked on, and just keep in mind, yes, there are cows in there, but actually we weren't walking that field when the cows were present. In this case, it's sort of like a V, but I just walked from the gateway to the edge and back to the top end, and did 186 plonks, and it came to 2,656 kilos. And with the, we then did a diagonal, 126 plonks, and it came to 2,628 kilos dry matter per hectare, sorry, which is actually a 28 kilo difference. So not a huge difference. And then when we look at the next slide, which is actually very relevant to this farm, this sort of shows the variations. So in this part of the farm here, the grass cover was lower. Through here, it was actually much higher. And by doing either the angled walk or the diagonal walk, we managed to get a good average across those fields. So it comes back to the main thing, that is actually knowing your farm and knowing your fields, and actually trying to find or walk, when you do walk it, trying to get that good average. Because at the end of the day, if you don't do that, you're only fooling yourself. Yeah, okay. So the other main thing that actually we do is actually the number of plonks. Unfortunately, we need to get this changed, but plate meters plonk at beep at 30 after it's done 30 plonks. And the tendency is for people to stop plonking. But you know, if you're only a third of the way across the field and you stop, then you haven't got a true representation. So my thing is keep plonking, and the more plonks, the better it will be. And in trials where we've done 30 versus 100 plonks, we've had variations of plus or minus 180 kilos. So if you look at that, that could be, if you're on the plus side of 180 and the minus of 180, that could be 360 kilos difference within the one pasture. So the main thing is, I say, keep plonking, and you'll get there. So equations are historical. They have been based on clicks, and as the counter in these cases turned one click, that was actually 5 millimeters. So if we use a good example of a equation, so assuming that actually this had done 15 clicks, we have the clicks here, we multiply it by the multiplier, and then the adder, and that would come to 2,600 kilos. So if we actually go to the next one, where we are using the later models, they are now actually measuring in millimeters. And so unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, we're still using the same old equation. So we do have to divide the millimeters by 5. So in this case, we have 75 millimeters was the measurement. We divide it by 5 to get the 15 clicks. We use the equation, which is times 140, and the adder, and it comes to 2,600, as we have actually got on the screen here. So equations are historical, and they have been based on grazing systems in New Zealand. And we've got to keep in mind there are seasonal variations. Also, even though I'm a Kiwi, UK is not New Zealand or Ireland. And I think we've got to remember there are large variations in soil type and the climate between even the UK and Ireland. It is also there are very, very, very different weather patterns, and it's just actually over the summer it's been very noticeable how the weather sort of moved up this side of the country all the time. So it does make a huge difference. And as time goes by, the data from GrassCheckGB will enable us to develop equations that are actually more suitable to the UK climate and soil type. So at the moment in the UK, there are two main equations being used. There's the times 125 plus 640, which is classed as the New Zealand late spring equation. And there's the times 140 plus 500, which is the plate meter default equation. And what is the difference? To be perfectly honest, at the bottom end, they're very, very similar, but there is a bit of a variation at the top end. The times 125 plus 640, which I mentioned before as a late spring, was introduced to the UK in the early to mid 90s by the first Kiwi consultants, and it's been used by some consultants ever since. The default equation in electronic meters, plate meters, is set at 140 plus 500. As this has actually been found to be more applicable to rye clover pastures. We could debate all day which one you use, but that's what is there at the moment. And so, as like I said before, going forward, we will be able to adjust these equations to suit the UK market. When you look at equations, it is not practical to keep changing equations on a weekly basis, but if based on trends, then that would work. I believe 3 or 4 equations should be used throughout the year within the UK. And such thing, we should have possibly an early spring equation, a late spring to early summer equation, a summer dry one, especially if it gets into really drought conditions, another one when the autumn rains come up, and then the late autumn one. And the late autumn one would actually be very similar to the early spring, or the same as the early spring equation. And I think it's quite important that actually as time progresses and we get more data from the GrassCheck project, that we do look at actually making or putting out there into the market the best equations, so people are getting the most accurate information they could get back from using a plate meter. So the key points of a plate meter: the plate meter measures height of compressed grass, not kilograms of dry matter. The equation converts the height to kilograms of dry matter per hectare. The operator's technique needs to be consistent. A representative area of the paddock must be walked, and walk the same route and keep plonking. Adverse environmental conditions will impact on accuracy, and maintenance is critical to ensure accuracy and reliability of readings. And I can't stress that actually, making sure the plate meter is clean and making sure that the plate meter actually works freely. So other methods of measuring, there's satellites, there's quadrants, there's drones, there's actually eyeballing, call it what you like, and there's animal intakes. So first of all, we'll cover satellites. So satellite pasture measurement has potential to be used within farm systems, and to date, our involvement has been providing plate meters as a benchmark against satellite data, and therefore adjustments have been able to be made. Farmers measuring 5 paddocks with a plate meter, and this data has been fed back to the satellite company. This has the added advantage of improving overall accuracy when combined with satellite data. Satellite measurements are often hindered by frequent cloud cover in temperate pastoral regions, and by using the plate meter data, they can calculate the cover changes on these days. This has had quite an effect on improving overall accuracy. Anomalies in readings eventuate in paddocks with non-perennial ryegrass species, i.e. herb species. And of course, actually, that's also applicable to plate meters, unless a different equation is being used. Satellites are very reliant on accurate records of timing and the location of grazing events. These events need to be entered, but quite often grazing records have been, or this is what they've found in the company that we're working with, are incomplete or non-existent. And as the farmers have interaction, the data becomes very unreliable. So quadrants, to be perfectly honest, a quadrant is the most scientifically accurate method, providing the cutting technique is consistent, but it is slow and it is fiddly. It only gives the reading of one small sample area and relies on the user picking a representative sample for the paddock. And I know Taro had in his presentation at least 20 quadrants, and I would say, yeah, at least 10 anyhow. And when we did this walk here, we actually took 3 quadrants, and we did it in a representative area. When I say we did it 3 meters apart, went out to the middle through the quadrant, sort of roughly 3 meters from where we're standing, and took quadrants and took it back. And actually, when we processed it, there was actually over 500 kilos difference in the 3 quadrants. So one came at 2,750, the other one was just over 2,900, and one was 3,250. So quadrants do work, but actually one quadrant is not enough. And we'd quite often get calls from clients saying that the plate meter is reading too high or low because I've cut a quadrant. And my first question is, how many quadrants were cut? At the end of the day, there needs to be 10 plus quadrants taken. The biggest problem with actually quadrants is not as practical in the commercial world, where we need to get a rough idea cover for the whole farm. There's no way if you've got 30 paddocks, you're going to go and take 10 quadrants per field, because that is over 300 cuts. And I'm afraid the microwave or the oven would be going full time just to actually process that. So other methods, there's drones out there. There's, as I said, eyeballing and also animal intakes. Drones carrying cameras with special sensors can be used to measure pasture growth. The biggest challenge for using drones for pasture measurement is having suitable sensors for estimating pasture mass and composition. At time, AOCs or active optical sensors can be saturated with too much green biomass. So basically the sensors measure greenness. And what happens is once you get over 2,500 kilos of dry matter, the greenness actually doesn't change much, or the greenness changes are too small for measurements to be accurate. So in other words, sensors do struggle with saturation effect and having difficulty distinguishing between lush green rotationally grazed paddocks of say 2,800 to 3,200. But as with everything, research is ongoing, and no doubt as technology develops, I'm sure this hurdle will be overcome. Unfortunately, with aviation rules, there's going to be some issue with drone user license, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. By eye or eyeballing, as it is called, it does work. Some people actually use it. The advantages, it is very quick and easy to do. The disadvantages, it can be inaccurate if your eye is not properly in. I would recommend that people start out with a measuring technique, and once their eye has been trained, they can then start eyeballing. Cow intakes can be recorded on a daily basis, and to be of benefit, these field grazing events need to be kept and then evaluated at the end of the grazing season. So you've actually got the comparisons, and so you actually got that data there. Also, a full pasture eating calculation can be carried out at the end of the grazing year. And for this, you need to know the livestock units, the purchase feed, and the units sold off the farm. So, there are other methods out there besides the plate meter, but whatever way you look at it, the plate meter is actually the simplest method that we've actually got. And just add into it there is a 3-leaf. A new leaf appears approximately every 6 to 7 days in the spring. The ideal grazing point is at about 2.5, maybe a little bit more leaves. Leaf survives for about 21 days. So an ideal realm to maximize pasture growth and quality is 18 to 21 days. In the summer and autumn, that appearance rate is 10 days with a 30-day lifespan, hence a longer rotation. Oops, sorry, we lost you. Right, yeah, so an ideal round, some of the autumn pairs, 10 days, yeah, we've done that one. Okay, on to the next one. Right, key points. There's a lot to be said for walking the property and viewing changes. The experienced operator can, to a certain degree, manage pasture from the office using the data available. But unless staff report back on residual, then it can soon go wrong. Maybe if historical data is available, then only a third of the farm needs to be walked each week. And you know, this comes back to the more data, the more accurate it becomes. And yes, I believe that actually that is a strong possibility that maybe the whole farm will not need to be walked. The GrassCheck project is correlating soil temperature in relation to soil moisture in relation to grass growth and dry matter. In reality, with all the data being generated by the GrassCheck project, then I don't think we're too far away from being able to provide accurate grass growth projections using the data sets that have been gathered. As more data is gathered through the GrassCheck project, there will be, the question is, will there be a need for plate meters, satellites, and drones? Maybe not, and that you know, we will see as time progresses. But the more data, the more accurate it will become, and we will be able to do all the projections, and we will know what's actually going out on the field. But it comes back to actually what data is there and the data sets available. So we'll move on to data and pasture utilization, and there is, I'm going to cover an area of quads, and that is not the quad bite, feed budgeting, growth rates, pasture utilization and allocation, and the feed wedge. Quads, and this is actually something I've used for many years, is quality, utilization, allocation, the deficit, and the surplus. So to ensure the highest quality of pasture, we've got to ensure that the highest quality of pasture is available to graze at any given point. And then the other thing is to utilize as much of the pasture grown as possible, allocate feed in relation to the demand, manage the deficit, manage the surpluses. And we need to adopt the management techniques required to achieve the above. Depending on the time of year, approximately 2,800 is the ideal grazing height. It is very important, if residuals are left too high, this will affect quality going forward, and machinery will need to be used to rectify the problem. The question in this case is the area being offered to stock too large? Or if supplements when used to feed, can they be reduced to actually reduce overall residuals? If residuals are too low, then animals run to fed, affecting production and the profitability of the business. The area needs to be increased or supplementary feed needs to be added. The feed budget, to be perfectly honest, the feed budget is exactly the same as the cash flow. What's the balance? Where is it going? Planning ahead, planning and acting on deficits, planning and acting on surpluses, and key target points. Growth rates, they are worked out by the difference between the last week's walk and this week's walked. When used in conjunction with a feed wedge or budget, enables the manager to plan when to take off surplus pasture, supplementary feed to increase the cover, or to cover the deficits, reduce the purchase feed costs. And here's just a quick, simple thing. And yes, I've used dairy cows for this because it is much easier to show how to allocate pasture. But for argument's sake, if we had a 2-hectare field and 200 cows and they required 18 kilograms of dry matter per day, we're feeding 4 kilograms of supplement, then the demand is 14 kilograms. Our 200 cows would require 14 kilograms, so that would come to a total of 2,800. And if we actually had a paddock with a 2,900 kilo cover, and we're aiming for 1,500 residual, and there was actually 1,400 kilograms per hectare available. The paddock's 2 hectares, that is 2,800 available. So we've got happy cows, so they're actually fed well, or actually in theory, the demand equals what's available within that field. So we've had an interesting year this year with the early dry April period. So I was just going to show a few wedges from a farm that I've been dealing with this last spring. So in the mid-April period, that's how his feed wedge was looking. He did have a surplus area built up. He's sort of hugging the line, his demand line pretty well. And it was looking at that stage, this is actually before it started to get really dry, it was looking actually pretty good. But it changed. So when he got towards the end of the April, in this case, he was below the demand line, and it was starting to look a little bit dire, because actually when we got into sort of a couple of weeks into May, this is actually how we projected it was going to look. Keep in mind this yellow line is actually where we thought it was going to go. So what this farmer did in this case, he actually purchased in some fodder beet to actually try and fill up this deficit that he could see that was going to come as time went on. But then actually what happened at the end, end of May, we got some rain, didn't we? So this is actually how his whole wedge is now worked out. So by the end of June, he's actually it fed extra feed, he's managed to build up covers, and if anything, he's gone into surplus. And what actually does make it a bit easier for this farmer, it is an autumn calving herd, so it was much easier to build up this wedge. So what's going to happen is now, or actually what he did do at the end of June, was actually take off silage off these paddocks here. So, you know, it's just been a very, very interesting sort of year where actually covers a change, but sort of looking at feed wedges, I think that's one of the most vital tools that are out there to assist farmers as they go forward. Dad, management tools for utilization. So every farmer has within his, I suppose, tools or toolbox, tools that actually can use. And one of those is rotation length. So actually by varying the rotation length, it will actually affect how pastures in front of the cows, or actually how quickly they're using it to actually keep quality there. The appropriate restocking rate makes a real difference to pasture quality. Grazing at the correct cover for the right residuals. So, you know, it comes back to residuals. Residuals are very, very important. Don't overgraze. So if the residuals are too low, then do use supplements. Manage surpluses by taking off silage or speeding up the round or whatever. And pasture renewal. Just, you know, make sure if pastures are actually getting tired, then renew them. And don't, this is more for the beef and sheep farmers, don't keep stock on an area for more than 3 days, because actually this will affect regrowth. And that's a very vital point to remember. So utilisation key points: measure, monitor, and manage. Managing grass is not easy, but if tools that are available are used, then it becomes much easier, and the monetary rewards are there for the taking. So with pasture quality, ensure nutrients are not limiting pasture production. Implement a rotational grazing plan to maximize the leafy stage of growth. And, you know, the key is a dense pasture sward to intercept as much sunlight as possible. Minimize sward damage if possible by overgrazing, soil pugging, etc. And to be perfectly honest, overgrazing and even sometimes soil pugging can be achieved through strategic use of supplements and standing cows off pasture if necessary. Use grass silage as a supplement to ensure long-term pasture yields. Put in place a program of pasture renewal based on analysis of field current yield, and newer species planted have better growth potential, more winter cool seasonal growth, better leaf to stem area, and higher digestibility. Tetraploids have greatly replaced diploids as the herd appears to graze these pastures more easily and tolerate higher pre-grazing covers. So pasture utilisation, improved pasture utilisation has the greatest ability to underpin profit. Not utilising homegrown feed equates to a waste of money. As the farm focuses on maximising the amount of high quality pasture grow to eat in, pasture can be mowed, pre-grazing to maintain quality, stock are shifted as residual targets are met, electric fence is used if required. Make use of programs, and this is important. You know, there are programs out there like AgriNet and Kingswood, and they do make actually the management of pasture very, very easy, and also allow the user to look at actually deficits, surplus, and I still going back to the feed wedges. I think the feed wedge is one of the most valuable tools, especially for a new user that's actually starting out. You can actually straight away have a picture of where all your deficits and where the surpluses are appearing on your farm, what paddocks to go and what paddocks to graze. So just a few slides to finish off with. Success is neither magical or mysterious. Success is a natural consequence of constantly applying the basic fundamentals, and this really applies to actually pasture management. Success is connected with action. Successful people keep moving, they make mistakes, but they don't quit. And within pasture management, mistakes will be made. And you know, that is part of it, but it's actually how you deal with the mistakes and how quickly you can recover from the mistakes that are made. And with pasture, you don't always get what you wish for. I mean, this year has been a good example of that. With the dry period in the spring, it was looking actually, I remember going on to a farm because I did happen to be in this country in 1976 and also again in 1990 when we had two quite dry years. And I remember having a discussion with the farmer or the farmer where those feed wedge were from. And we were sort of thinking, gosh, maybe this is going to be a 1976 year. And as a consequence, he did actually go and react to that and brought in fodder beet. Probably with hindsight too much, but you know, we sort of planned on that. But at the end of the day, you don't always get what you wish for, but you always get what you work for. And it comes back to flexibility and monitoring and measuring and managing. Okay, and thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Robert. That was really good. I really like the you get what you work for. It's a really good one. Okay, thank you very much for that from both speakers. That was really engaging. While we're waiting for the questions to sort of pop up and appear, we will, one second, we will just remind you that this was recorded, so it will be all available on the GrassCheckGB website for consumption at a later date, so you can gather all your friends and family members around and rewatch it with some popcorn. Okay, we'll just look at the questions here. The questions have been coming thick and fast, and I'll try and bring them up in no particular order. But there's one question that two people have asked, both Jan and Trina, about herbal lays. And with the increasing use of mixed swards and herbal lays as part of the grazing platform on many farms, how does the plate meter how is the person using the plate meter able to get an accurate equation without using different sward type equations?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. And this comes back to the more data we get in, the more work we can do on equations. At the moment, there's not enough work being done, and the more, I mean, I suppose the other way to explain it is, I've got a few clients out there that are actually feeding back data. They're actually cutting, they're drying, they're feeding that data back, and we're actually developing equations to suit the different swards. Are we there yet? No, we're not. And it will take time to actually get all that information so it becomes relevant.
Okay. Another question from David Pickard. Can plate meters be used in a cutting only situation to assess the yield at mowing and then measuring stubble height to get an assessment of harvested yield in each field?
Sorry, I missed that.
So can plate meters be used in a cutting only situation to assess the yield at mowing and then measuring the stubble height to get an assessment of the yield that's been harvested?
So is the question, can a plate meter be used? Sorry.
Yes.
To do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to remember a plate meter accuracy really tapers off over 3,000 kilograms of dry matter. It is just the nature of actually the way a plate meter works. They're not really designed, what I say, to actually measure silage swards is the best way to describe it. Saying that with the newer type plate meters, we are able to, or we have developed what's called a variable equation. So within the app, we can actually compensate for the different height in the pasture. But is it an ideal tool for actually measuring for silage? No, it's not. There's no point actually sort of trying to say it is.
Okay. Interesting one here from Sarah. How much does the slope of the field affect the accuracy of the plate meter?
Sorry, we missed that again, Bruce. Sorry.
Sorry, my internet might be
Yes.
suffering the effect of being in rural Scotland. How much does the slope of the field affect the accuracy of the plate meter?
I mean, at the end of the day, it is placing the plate meter square to the ground. So if you're going to, the best way to explain it is if you've got a hill that's at 45 degrees and you're going to have that plate meter standing perpendicular to the ground, it's going to be out. So yes, the plate meter needs to be angled to the, roughly to the surface that it's being used on, yes. Not that you're going to probably be walking down a 45 degree slope, but you know, a slight slope, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, that's not going to make a great deal of difference.
Okay. We're getting a good selection of questions here, so we'll try and rattle through them as best we can. One here, is it best to top a paddock off after 3 days grazing to reset it and tidy up any docks and stocky grass gone to seed, or to leave it to keep a good residual?
Do you want to answer one, Taro? Okay. My question, my answer to that is, if it needs topping, then top it. You know, it's the end of the day is I have a thing or personal thing about residuals. If the residuals get too long, then the next grazing is you've got to sort of think the cows will actually only graze down to the residuals that were there before. And if you keep leaving, I call it, it's what I call thatch. So if you actually keep leaving that level of thatch within the bottom of the pasture, each time the grass will actually, the cows will only eat down to that thatch. So you end up with actually, even though the plate measure might be measuring a lot more, the actual residual will actually keep going. So the amount available actually becomes even less. So if the pasture hasn't been grazed out properly, there are a load of docks, there is a problem, then actually you should be topping it, or as I call it, really bottoming it, just cutting it down and refreshing it and resetting it. Otherwise, you're not actually getting the full benefit of that paddock.
Okay. Another one that's come in is, what's your opinion of the electrical capacitance probe or the simple QMS sward board as alternatives? And just to clarify that the QMS sward board was a very primitive pocket plate meter that QMS used to provide, and the HDB provided something similar. It's been replicated all over the place.
Okay, I suppose I'm not going to get into a debate of which is better. I mean, the key is whatever works for the user. Okay, if it's accurate, if you're getting the results you need, then you should use what you think. It's and I go back to, that can be expanded out to satellites, drones, you name it. Are they accurate? Are you getting the information? And the best thing actually to tell you how accurate the tool that you're using is if you're putting cows in, if you take a measurement, you do the sums, you work out actually what's available, and you do the sums, and the residuals are there, then you will know whatever you got is actually working or as accurate as possibly can be. But yeah, it's a difficult one. You know, it's not a time to get into debate of actually how accurate different measuring tools are. I think the user will know if the tool he's got is actually reading correctly, and if it's not, then change what you're using. It's as simple as that.
I want to, Bruce, I want to follow up on that one. When you talk about the accuracy of the tools, I think there are two different meanings to it. One is the absolute accuracy, meaning that how many tons per hectare we have got. And then the purpose of knowing that is probably at the very end of the season. You want to think about the stocking rate for the next season. So you want to match the supply and demand. And in that case, this absolute accuracy does matter. On the other hand, if you are measuring the grass to optimize the rotation within the stocking rate you have got right now, then what matters more is the relative growth or relative dry matter between the paddocks. So in that case, even if the tool you have got has got a little bit lower accuracy, if the error translates equally across all the paddocks, then it doesn't matter because the relative relationship is exactly the same. So you have to be very aware of why you want to be accurate about these measurements, whether it is for rotation or it is for calculation of the stocking rate next season.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And yeah, it's all these tools have their advantages, but it's how you utilize them. And I will say the QMS sward boards are excellent ice scrapers as well as grass tools. One here about how does slurry application affect rotation length?
Taro? I suppose, how does it affect rotation rate? I mean, it will depend really on when you're going to provide it, whether you actually have rain afterwards, how quickly the slurry washes off the grass, because the biggest issue generally with slurry application is the contamination and whether or not actually the cows will then eat the grass. And yeah, there's so many variables that we're seeing within that. It depends on whether, like I said, whether it rains after it, how much rain you get, how much was put on. So to be perfectly honest, there's no real hard and fast answer to that one. It depends actually on the cleanliness of the pasture and whether the cows will actually eat it.
Okay. One here, how confident are you about cover estimates of sheep swards that are grazed to a low residual when using a plate meter?
Yeah, and I would actually, that's a very interesting one. I would actually say not enough work has been done with sheep swards. Okay, and this is one of the things is we'll get the information back from the GrassCheck program as time progresses, and we'll be able to then work out equations that's going to suit the sheep farmer. Because if you look at it, the best thing the way I describe it is a field that actually is being grazed by sheep continuously, or on a rotational system, is going to be a much thicker sward, and it's going to be much denser. So to be perfectly honest, an equation that's been used in a plate meter that suits a dairy farmer is not really going to possibly be the ideal equation for a sheep and beef unit. And like I said, as time progresses and we get the information back from the GrassCheck program, then we'll be able to develop equations that will actually look at both the available cover and the residuals that have been left on sheep grazed pastures. And at the moment, the answer is we're not there. They're not even there in New Zealand when it comes to that.
Okay. We've got a very specific one that I'll give you guys, and it's a question with the default 140/500 setting. I struggle to ever graze down to 1500.
Yep.
1750 seems to be a much more realistic without compromising intake. Is that unusual?
No. Horses for courses.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I will say, I mean, once again, plate meters, because it does depend on the soil. If you're actually, the best way to describe it is, and I've actually only seen this on very, very few farms. Sometimes you'll get farms, especially on sandy soils, where the fields are absolutely level. There's no pugging. There's nothing holding the plate up. What happens is when you get below the 1700, 1600 kilo mark, things happen. There's little divots in the ground. There's soil gets pushed up. There can be crowns of the pasture, and they will hold the plate up. So really, to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't get too bogged down about actually readings below that level, because yeah, we always talk and work on 1500 kilos of dry matter. If the plate meter is reading 1700 and you think it's less, then I think that's the time to use your eye and actually put that in as their measurement, because plate meters are not the end all and be all, especially at the lower levels, because there's actually so much, what I say, the best way to describe it is there can be other factors that will affect how well the plate meter reads at that level. And just actually building on that a little bit, one of the big issues that we quite often have is after people have taken off silage, when they go out and do the first measurement, it's fine, but then actually when they measure the residuals after that, the residuals are a lot higher than normal, and it's because actually there's a bit of stubble there holding the plate up. So you've always got to keep that one in mind. Okay.
Okay. One from Andy King here. How do you consider rejections after the cows have gone through 3 or 4 rotations?
Oh, there's one way to do it, isn't it? Just top it, bottom it. That sorts it.
Nice and simple. How soon will the new way of measuring grass growth be available?
New way?
Sorry. Yeah, no. If we could get a bit more, it's a question from Jim. If you could expand on that a little bit, Jim, I'll maybe come back to you. There's a question from Reese, who's now left, but what are your thoughts on pre-mowing?
Once again, horses for courses. Some farmers think it's the best thing since sliced bread. Other farmers who have tried it actually don't like it, and it doesn't work. It does work if it's wilted and it's wilted correctly. And once again, as I said, horses for courses. Some people like it, some people think it's the ideal way. I suppose the best time to actually use pre-mowing is if you're going into a period where you might have actually had some paddocks that you were thinking you were going to take off a silage, the covers have got a little bit long, they could be sort of 3.3, 3.2, 100 kilos, and you know, if you put the cows into that, it's not ideal, but if you actually pre-mow it, then the chances are they'll utilize a lot of it. But like I said, it's horses for courses. I know farmers that actually have tried it and they'll never do it again. I know farmers who actually swear by it, and that comes down to what's your personal preference.
Okay, worth mentioning the difference in benefit between mowing and topping, I think,
Yep.
as well. Would you recommend mowing instead of topping in most circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, my thing is mower. A lot of toppers don't get down low enough. Is the best way. So that you know, so the best thing is actually a mower rather than a topper. Some toppers these days do, but a lot of them don't. And you know, at the end of the day, it comes back to what I was talking about earlier on. If once you get a level within your pasture, or actually a thatch level as I call it, that will stay there. You'll never get below that. So the lower you can actually graze out, especially in those first rounds, the better quality feed you'll actually carry through the rest of the year.
Okay, just conscious of time, I think we've got time for one or two more questions. We've got a bit of clarity on that one about the new methods that are going to be available. So really looking at the future methods and how far away we are from getting accuracy from things like soil DM or satellites instead of plate meters.
Taro, you got an answer to that or not?
Yes, so we are measuring we are part of the GrassCheck and farm as well. Then what we try to do is to measure the same paddock with multiple methods, and then some of the results you showed very quickly earlier. So we try to come up with the difference between them, and then try to calibrate so that we can confidently show that the tool can convert one result to another. So for the drone and also satellite, I would say maybe a couple of years. We are hoping, but I don't really know. Robert, do you have any more plan for that?
No, so I mean, with we've done a lot of work with the satellite company in the southern hemisphere. And what the company that we're dealing with is every time they're actually signing somebody up to the satellite program, they are selling a plate meter at the same time, and because on the belief that actually they do need to have something to benchmark the satellite readings against. And the other issue that they've actually had, all right, this is an Australian company, the other issue they have had is actually if it just happens when the satellite goes over that there's cloud cover, and that happens a couple of times in a row, then things get out of kilter. So one of the things they've actually found is by using the plate meter and feed that data in, they're not walking the whole farm with the plate meter, mind you, it's only about 5 or 6 paddocks. They're feeding that data into their data set, and they're actually able to adjust the reading so it becomes more accurate. So yeah, it's going to take time, 2 years, 3 years, who knows? I mean, it's like with all technology, it's like the drone technology. It's like it will all get better, but it will take time. Is it there? I think satellite is close, but there are actually some issues that are actually there. And I did put in my presentation, you know, the more data that's there, will we even need satellites and drones? Will we need plate meters? Because basically, if we have soil temperature, soil moisture, and a load of data sets behind us, we will be able to calculate it. I know that sounds a little bit controversial, but you know, do we need to have plate meters? Do we need drones? Do we need satellites?
I would also like to follow up on one thing that so we have got the small scale farm and also large scale farms, and the smallest one we have got is about 20 hectares, and that's probably not the a very realistic situation. But the point I was going to raise was that the smaller it gets, the time difference you need is very small. So you charge the drone, you set up the drone, you fly it, you analyze the image and so on. And then it takes probably more than 2 hours we need for the pasture walk with the plate meter. So and given the small incremental improvement in accuracy, if your farm is very small, unless you want to do that for technical reasons or fatigue or your physical condition, whatever, the incremental the value in information might not warrant it. I'm not sure if Robert has got a similar view or not. But.
Okay, I think we'll just go for one final question as time's wearing on. We'll go for, what advice would you give to someone setting off on rotational grazing, moving from set stocking so as to not overcomplicate it, but to start thinking about feed allocation, grass growth, and matching to livestock requirements? What would be your top tips on that?
Taro?
I would say that the most important set of information is to understand the difference in the production capability across different paddocks, so that you can come up with strategy where you put the animals first, how you move them, and where you cut the silage for the winter, so that overall the resources get maximized. Robert?
Yeah, and my addition to that is, one of the keys is actually subdivision, and whatever you do, initially it won't be right, but you've got to just get sort of some system in place, some rotational system in place. In my presentation, and it's just not what I say. The ideal scenario is you don't leave a cow on a pasture more than actually 3 days, because it starts affecting the regrowth. Well, when you're starting out, it may end up 4, it may end up 5. It is a matter of actually setting your farm up, setting it up so you've got easy access to your fields, setting it up so you can actually move the cows or the stock or the sheep or whatever it is easily. But whatever you do, have a plan in place, and it doesn't happen overnight. It is not a 5-minute thing. And I go back to what I said in the presentation is, once you've actually got some sort of rotational system in place, what will happen is you will soon start seeing reaping the rewards of actually the extra pasture going and the extra utilization, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Perfect, thank you. And I see that someone's commented, get a good advisor. The questions there. Sound advice as well. So a big thank you for everyone that's listened, especially everyone that's asked questions. That's really helpful. We did miss out a few questions, unfortunately, due to time, but contact details are on the GrassCheckGB website, so get in touch if you've got anything else, and we'll do our best to answer them that way. We've had a great turnout. There's still a lot of people hanging on in there, which is great news. Keep an eye out on the GrassCheckGB website for other resources and information on the next webinars, as well as a link to this webinar if you want to go back through it. Everyone that has registered will receive an email alerting you when it's live on the website as well. And of course, a massive thank you to Robert and Taro for taking the time out of their very busy days in the middle of peak grass growing season, and for providing us with some really interesting information and food for thought. So thank you for attending, and look after yourselves. Bye-bye.
Thank you.